Okay.
And Christie,
Thank you. Steve.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay, see. Did Liz?
And 8.
okay, 5 o'clock. We have a quorum. Let's call the meeting to order. Hi, Kim.
Again.
Any additions or approval to the minutes?
Oh, changes to the agenda, right?
Oh, yes, changes to the agenda.
I'll open them up.
I'm supposed to read what I'm calling off. And now, any changes to the minutes? From anybody? Without objection, can we approve the minutes?
Approved.
Okay,
Approved.
be known. Is there anybody who wants to give public comment?
I think I would, I'm technically public.
Yes, for the moment.
Yeah, for the moment. One of the things I wanted to say is at the last meeting, someone suggested that there be a townwide survey on this project, on if it should happen, how it should happen, how many people they want coming into town, what kind of housing they want in town. There was a survey at the beginning, and I'm just gonna put forward on the record that there should be another. That's one thought that I've had, and then the other one was someone asked me what if it had been looked at if a land trust could buy the land and act as and like bring in their own developer, and I didn't have an answer to that, so I wanted to ask the group if that's a possibility. So those are my two things. Yeah.
Okay.
Any
I think a public survey is a good idea.
Yeah, I agree.
I think we could work off of what was done before and modernize it. I think it's an excellent idea.
When it was done before, was it done by, there was a mailer and it was online, right?
Aaron did it. It was online.
It was online. Yeah, I worked on it with Eli and Dan Bengus, and yeah, we had like 70 something respondents, which as I understand is a very good turnout for a town of Plainfield size. And it was it was very preliminary, just around we can dig up the sort of overall synthesis of the results, but it was very much that people were in favor of it, but in favor of the project, but also that they basically had a lot of questions and wanted to see how it was going to proceed and what the designs were going to look like. And it was also conducted in September and October of 2024, when I think everybody had questions about how things were going to proceed. And we're still working on resolving that, which is sort of the point of this group. But I think I totally would agree that we need to put some more survey out there. I think developing what those next set of questions are with regards to particularly design, because as folks will recall, not only did we have that initial public survey, but then we had the design charrette, and then we had 2 rounds of open public comment on designs. The first was the 3 designs, which were then condensed down to 1 design. And in each of those rounds, I think the first round we had 60 respondents approximately, and in the second round we maybe had 40. And so that it was, my recollection was between the 2 rounds, we had over 100 responses to various aspects of the survey. And it was, the drawing that was just the distillation of the 3 drawings into 1 had significantly responded based on the responses of the first round. So I think continuing to build on that, as particularly as we look at the new directions. And while we weren't able to join the last meeting, we had a chance to read the minutes and also look at the drawings that Rick and that work group generated. And I think it would be a good thing for us to consider as a group how we want to continue to examine that and get public input on that direction. So that's to respond to that. And I did have one comment in response to Eli's comment about a land trust, and I think there's certainly no reason why the project couldn't be handled in that direction technically, but from a grants availability and a permitting standpoint, it remains much if the town continues to be a lead entity, the accessibility of a lot of those funds, particularly the community development block grant, but also some of the others that have been considered, like the Northern Borders block grant. My understanding is that the town needs to be the lead entity on the grant funding side for that.
Right. The
So
other thing,
I'm reading through the statute of the CHIP Act, it is more conducive to one developer coming in and buying a lot. So
Right.
if it was like non-grant funded, but more like tax increment finance funded for the infrastructure, that, the wording in that law is much more clearly defined around a developer coming in and doing it on a single property.
mhm. Is a developer a defined term? And I think we're gonna get to that as an agenda item with our,
Yeah.
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 So one more, I'm sorry, go ahead, Laura.
Well, no, I just wanted to respond also to Eli's question about the land trust. I was at a meeting recently, a day-long seminar that the Preservation Trust of Vermont held, and there was a land trust there from the Northeast Kingdom who have been trying to develop some housing. And so it's not that that can't be done, but as Arian said, I think our first choice on this project would be to try to get the community development block grant, because I think it would give us the most funding if we get it. And I think it would, I'm not sure if it would be less complicated, but I think we're kind of in agreement that it would be the best source of funding. The other thing I would say is that I noted that somebody posted recently on Facebook a story about developers, one developer in particular pulling out of a planned project at Isabel Circle in Montpelier because of expenses. So I think attracting a private developer to do these kind of projects might be more difficult in the future, especially if they're going to be actually building the housing. I mean,
Risk on one.
yeah.
One more quick comment on the survey idea. I just wonder if we should think about timing and what the best timing to do it is. And would it be smarter for us to wait till we knew more about the development block grant to pull in that thing, to get that information?
Hello.
Okay, moving on. Arian, do you mind if I should have done this at the beginning. Do you mind if we switch 4 and 5 and we can let Josh go first?
Sounds good.
Okay. So, Josh, thank you for coming from Vermont League, correct?
Yeah. So Josh Hanford, Director of Intergovernmental Relations at the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. I also happen to have been the past housing commissioner for Department of Housing and Community Development and the director of the CDBG block grant period after Irene. So I know a little bit of what you're talking about. I will just say in all of these programs, whether it be CHIP or CDBG DR or Northern Border Regional funding or any of these, there's always an element that allows a municipality to partner with a developer or to pass through the grant to a housing trust, a land trust. In this region, it's Downstreet out of Barry, partnership. Yes, the municipality is the legal applicant and has to be the legal applicant in most cases. But understanding sort of where the role of a municipality starts and ends, sometimes you often need someone else to build the housing. Municipality finances the infrastructure, someone else builds the housing with an agreement of what you want there. But stepping back from that, CHIP, Community Housing Infrastructure Program was passed and signed. It is rather substantial. It's literally the largest investment in infrastructure, or you could call it housing, because that's what it has to be used for in the end, in the state's history. It allows up to $200 million per year in tax increment for 10 years, so $2 billion to go towards the infrastructure to support housing. I'll tell you the timeline right now, just so you get a sense. The entity that's responsible for accepting the applications, let's just call it that, from municipalities is it's the Vermont Economic Progress Council, or VEPC, which is embedded in the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. It's the same entity that approves the big TIF, the tax increment financing, for these big towns, big sections. Same entity that approves the Vermont Employment Growth Initiative, which is an employer growth initiative. It's made up of some governor appointees and some legislators, has an executive director and some staff that understands finance, accounting. It has an estate economist assigned to them to evaluate the projects. They are going through what is called rulemaking. They'll start in July. They have to the end of October to submit rules to the Legislative Committee on Rules. So back to the legislature to say, these are the rules that we're going to govern this program that you passed. You know, because the legislation doesn't define every detail. There's some flexibility and some ambiguity in what some of the legislation means, so they have to define that in these rules. They're going to form some subcommittees and take, public hearing and testimony to help influence their rules. They're going to try to use as much of existing big TIF rules as are applicable, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel if something is already defined term, or if there's already a process they can duplicate. One of the questions that they have to put down in rule, because the legislation is very open-ended on infrastructure, they call it improvements. What does that mean? Initially the bill defined every type of infrastructure eligible for this increment, including flood resiliency, flood recovery, brownfield, everything. They took all those details out and just said improvements. The board, the executive director of EPSI, we talked to her yesterday. They have every intention of including maximum flexibility, including flood resiliency, recovery, brownfield, everything that could possibly consider sort of a public infrastructure improvement investment that would support housing. But there is a process for the public to stay involved over these next few months. That gets submitted to the legislature in November. They have like 30 days to react. The goal is to start accepting applications for this program in late January of 2026. So pretty soon. But it's not like you need to get in the first day, because this is a 10-year program. With that said, some of the things to think about are the increment, which is, when the infrastructure gets built to allow the new housing to be built, there's going to be new property taxes generated, right? Every home that's built, let's just say the average new home is $400,000 or the assessed value or whatever it ends up being. There's new property tax generated, right? So the municipality has to give up 85% up to 100% of that new increment to help pay off the debt, and the state has to give up at least 75% of that new increment if it's market rate housing. If it's affordable housing, the state has to give up 85% of its increment. That increment of that new property tax is what pays back the debt for whatever borrowing needs to happen to build the infrastructure, whether it be roads, bridges, possibly telecom, think broadband, think sidewalks, think, if there's mitigation measures because you're stabilizing something or you're raising something, brownfield cleanup, whatever that is, that increment for those 10 years, no, the increment can be a maximum of 20 years. But everyone has the intent of paying it off as soon as possible, right? Because as soon as you pay off all the debt, 100% of the new tax revenue goes into the state coffers, into the municipal coffers. So no one wants to, it works in opposite of the big TIF. The big TIF gives you 20 years, you keep adding as much things in that to maximize your build out. This works in the opposite. You designate a project, you get approved, you borrow the money to build the infrastructure, you build the infrastructure. Literally, as soon as the infrastructure is built, that assessed value starts to go up, even before buildings start to get built. Because once you've improved land, property with infrastructure, its assessed value goes up. And your tax assessors, your listers, every year will enter a new value as the building's happening. So that increment starts to build. The increment is used to pay off the debt. The increment can also be used to pay for the municipality's expenses, to ensure due diligence, pay for an attorney to review the documents, pay for, a tax accountant, pay for a project manager. And it can go retroactive to reimburse you from earlier expenses you took on before you started to get the increment. And so that's a great new tool to help, especially smaller communities that, they don't have, those professional staff on hand. The development that's receiving the increment needs to be largely housing. There's a 60% floor area requirement that has to be at least 60% housing, unless you can prove that the community has another need. That example that was used as repurposing an old school. If you need new infrastructure to support housing, maybe you want to keep the gym, some other common areas, and it's going to throw off that 60% minimum square footage for housing. You can get around that by saying this is a community need and get under the 60% housing threshold. There is a but for the market rate housing. You need to prove that you need the housing. I think most communities can prove they have a need for housing through some documents, their town plan, some housing needs assessment. If it's affordable housing, which is defined by, pretty easy to meet, only 15% of the units need to be affordable housing. You don't need to meet the but for, it automatically qualifies. So there's additional incentives to encourage affordable housing. They get a bigger increment. They get a 10% boost in that increment to help pay back the debt. They don't need to meet the but for. Those are all reasons why a housing land community trust such as Down Street or others might want to work with the municipality, because it makes their cost to build the housing cheaper, because they don't have to pay for the infrastructure that they normally have to pay for with their grants and their loans and their tax credits. And usually it's a desire of most municipalities to include, some portion of the housing being affordable. Trying to think of other sort of thresholds, how the program would work. Like I said, the rules will be written between July and October. Then there'll be applications accepted in January. The key for the application of EVEAC is there has to be a development agreement. So the municipality isn't the only one that can take out the debt. This program allows a developer or a third party, such as an affordable housing finance agency or a regional planning commission or regional development corporation, to be that third party and actually take out the debt. So the municipality doesn't need to borrow it. But the agreement would say that increased tax revenue that the municipality would normally get in the state goes to pay back that debt of that developer under this agreement. And that's why that development agreement is the key document, why you need due diligence and an attorney to review it and everyone to make sure everyone's protected, because that's the document that protects the sort of ongoing fiduciary responsibilities of the municipality and their taxpayers. But it gives flexibility. It lets you have options. Municipality, take out the debt, a housing developer take out the debt, or some sort of third party, interested nonprofit or someone could be your partner as well. But that development agreement defines what you're building as housing. to make sure you meet those requirements of square footage. Is there affordability component? You know, you talking single family homes for sale? Are you talking apartments? Are you talking mixed use with some, you know, street level commercial? The program is housing agnostic. It could be condos, it could be multifamily apartments, it could be single family homes, it could be a mobile home park. It's housing type agnostic, just meeting the needs of the community. And the housing is what gets you the infrastructure paid for with this new mechanism. It's literally a pay as you grow program that has no location requirements. You don't have to be in an exact Act 250 exempt area. You don't have to be in the village center. You don't have to be anywhere. You have to get your normal permits and land use. It's sort of area agnostic as well. You know, some places you're not going to get a permit to build, like right back in the floodplain or somewhere else. So it just leaves that all to the existing land use laws to make the right decision of where the housing should be, but puts the community in the driver's seat of what housing type they want, how much they want, and how much they want to extend themselves with this mechanism to pay for that infrastructure, which we know is a barrier to build housing, because if you don't pay for it with the taxpayers, with the municipality, the developer's paying for it, and it makes the cost of the housing go up and less affordable to everyone. So I'll sort of stop there and see if there's questions that I could answer. A lot's still in development, but.
I think Aaron has a question.
Arian?
Thanks, Josh, for coming and giving us the lowdown on this program. I think it's a really timely, important program, and glad that the legislature, I know it was a little iffy there at the end, that it came together. I think a question for us in our town, and I'm sure we're not the only one in this, is that, you know, the current way that we're looking at structuring this is as a new neighborhood. And within that context, I think if anybody who spent time in Plainfield knows that we're not exactly a cookie cutter community, and the idea that somehow there's a cookie cutter housing development that goes in there, I think that's actually one thing that in the survey from last fall did come out very clearly as something that people did not want. And so within that context where the proposal is to sell lots, and that with a requirement on the probably in some kind of deed restriction that says they have to build on them within a certain period of time. How does that fit within this structural framework? Because it sounds like some kind of development agreement, which, you know, a deed restriction is an agreement. How do you see, how does that come together here? And as they're writing the rules, is there maybe an opportunity for input just to make sure that this kind of thing could be covered?
Yeah, no, those are good questions, and I don't know if I have the answer to all of them, because I'm not sure how they're going to deal with that sort of. We'll extend the infrastructure to a place that has lots laid out that, you know, have some conditions on the lots and the building, but there isn't actually housing yet to sort of either price point or to determine whether it's going to be affordable or someone builds a, you know, $2 million home there or a mobile home. I don't know exactly that answer, but what I can say is, you know, like I'm involved in my own community. I live in Randolph. There's a Randolph Area Community Development Corp, which is a very small regional housing trust, affordable housing trust. And we've got a project where, you know, we had a 12-unit apartment building going up, and then 9 single-family home lots that we're trying to build out that's on a microgrid. It's very complicated, so people have direct current and all this. And the goal was to spec out those homes and have people pre-buy them. So they would pick through a design standards, you know, any of these types, and you would pick that and you would pay to have it built, but you bought the lot with the infrastructure, with the type of electricity. And there would be, you know, some people might need affordable housing finance, some people might not, go for market. And so I think if you had some plan that sort of had some vision for the area, you could make this square peg round thing work. I think if it's totally open, I don't know if they would have enough information to evaluate whether you met the requirements of the program, is what you're you're sort of working against. You want, I can see, to be flexible and to be open for the community, not have, like you said, a cookie cutter neighborhood, but you might be able to strike a balance there where you're like, look, we know we need some type of affordable housing in the neighborhood. Maybe we have one area that's buildable for, I'm just throwing numbers out, up to a 20-unit multifamily. Okay, we'll find a developer for that, but we're not naming them. We're not going to pick someone. We're going to go through some sort of process to see who works best now. And then maybe we have 10, 20 single family lots, and they, like you said, you'd have some covenants on it, they would have to be, minimum this square footage or maximum this square footage, and have some of these basic conditions. And maybe there's enough there to have a conceptual that is a plan, a development plan. That's something more for someone to work with on as a community. Maybe there is a group or developer that would be like, okay, I can partner with you so far. I can see you want to keep some flexibility here, but in order for us to seek program funding, I would even argue that the CDBG funding application is going to ask for something.
Yeah,
They're going to say,
you're absolutely right in the sense that we're already aware that to even put that application together, we have to have a plan to address this. And Karen Hatcher, the grants administrator, and Pat Moulton, who you probably know, have already been, sort of thinking about how we can best put this together. So I think in some ways it's good to know that plan may be a multi-purpose plan, because the current budget scenarios that we're looking at, sort of scenario one is, home run with the disaster recovery funding, and scenario two is combination of revenue and this new CHIP program is kind of plan B. So in either scenario, it seems like putting together those lower income requirements or affordability, which also, by the way, was very important in our public surveys to date, that affordability as is sort of a key topic for all housing. So it's just good to know that plan is going to have a sort of multiple uses as we, no matter which path we kind of end up going down, it seems.
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention that's really important as you think about this plan, the goal is to build housing for residents, right? Not second homes.
Yes.
For rent. So there is a requirement in this program that the community has something in that agreement with whoever's building the homes that said you will have covenants or some restrictions until the debt is paid off, that these are for primary residents.
Right.
Once the debt's paid off, the municipality doesn't have any more debt, whoever built it, the home may have changed hands a bunch of times, and you can't really, nor I would argue it's good policy to say, well, you can't hook up to this water or sewer because you only live here 4 months of the year and you do. Like, that would be sort of weird policy on public infrastructure. But during the period that the taxpayers are financing it, it needs to be for permanent residents. And there needs to be some mechanisms to make sure that happens, which the municipality can pass on to whoever's building it.
Mhm. Josh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
What if there's an ADU on one of the lots and that is not necessarily the original permanent resident? What happens then?
Yeah, I don't think it's defined that well. I would think that that all sort of scenarios are going to play out. Someone's going to have a situation where they need to take care of a family member for 2 years, and they never intended to not be. So, like, we argued, as someone that represents municipalities, that we share the same goal, absolutely. But you got to be careful about how because last thing you would want to do is put someone who just bought a home and took out a mortgage in Vermont, now take away their remedies if they have to sell the home quickly, that now it's got a covenant, you couldn't sell it to someone that's not a Vermont resident yet. And I think there's some undefined work that needs to happen there that'll work out. And the ADA rules, you have to allow an ADU on any residence in Vermont now up to a certain size. And there isn't rules statewide yet that define that the ADU has to be a permanent resident, or you could short-term. I think there's some flexibility there. One last point about the lots and not having a defined plan or having a defined plan. If you think about the mechanism of what pays back the infrastructure, you've got to kind of work backwards, right? Because if you know the infrastructure costs to, and I don't know a lot about your project, I'm purposely staying out of the weeds and don't want to influence what you guys want to do, just answering general questions. Let's say it costs $6 million to bring the infrastructure to the place, everything all said and done where you want to build the housing. You need to plan for that development to kick off enough new property tax revenue to pay back that debt. So you do need to have some minimum plan for the housing development. Otherwise, the numbers don't work. Because you want to ensure that what you're developing will have enough new property tax revenue to pay back that debt. And anyone involved is going to want to see that.
Has the state defined affordability?
It is defined in the law. Affordability of housing for rental properties is someone at 80% of area median income shouldn't pay more than 30% of their household income.
Mhm.
So that's for, if you're doing rentals, it needs to support people at 80%, 80 income, 80 AMI and below. If you're doing home ownership, it needs support people at 120% AMI and below.
Mhm.
But of all those units, 15% in either of those categories designated for those income levels or below meet the definition in this program. There's other people, affordable housing developers, that will work towards a much higher percentage because that's how their numbers work with their grants. And but because this was meant to also work for a private developer, a small developer, to still meet those definitions, the percentage of the units are lower, so it can still cash flow.
Mhm.
When we're doing the calculations or projections on tax revenue from builds over time, what number should we be going for? Should we be looking at the municipal tax and the homestead tax rates and just those ones that are published, or should we look at the ones that are like real world, like what people are actually paying because they're low income? Like,
Yeah, interesting. So it's going to be on the assessed value of the property.
right,
And so if you have a income sensitized property, I still believe that the full assessed value is what is used, but that's,
but they're gonna be paying a lot less, so we're gonna be
Right.
less, so there's gonna be.
but I think that's collected from a statewide pool that subsidizes,
Okay.
and so this is where these sort of the folks that do this work and build out these developments, as you proceed and this gets really real, it's one of the things we're struggling with at VLCT, because this is a monumental change for Vermont in a positive way. This is the first growth plan for rural Vermont ever in the state of Vermont, as far as I can tell. We've done things like mandate upzoning. You need to have minimum density. Here's a place where if you meet these zoning requirements, Act 250 is exempt. All that was aspiration. You can't meet that unless you actually have infrastructure to support it. And we came up with no funding and no way to pay for the infrastructure until now. But there is a void right now. Who's going to answer these questions? Who's going to pay for it? Typically, the LCT doesn't do project management work. We're not a developer. We have lawyers that answer questions for towns, legal questions. We advocate in the legislature, but we don't have staff that do development assistance like this. Who does, right? So RPCs provide some sort of help to get your planning right, sort of think about managing grants. The RDCs, Rural Development Corps, sometimes play intermediary developer. They'll own a piece of property, such as the one you're talking about, during the development, and then turn it over when it's done to the end user, because they can take on grants and they can take risks. There's housing developers, both private and nonprofit, that do this work and have worked with communities and have some of these agreements already in place from certain areas. The White and Burke is a consultant company out of Burlington that has been involved in every TIF district in the state. They obviously are experts, but right now there's a void of who to send everyone to for next steps. And I can tell you VLCT is thinking about that. We're meeting with the state after 4th of July with all the V partners, all the agencies organizations that have V in their name, okay, we need a toolkit, a chip, next steps. And here's a sample agreement. And here's a sample RFP to solicit different developers, so you don't feel like you're picking the first person that comes, and your residents can feel like you're doing your due diligence. And so there's a lot to come and a lot of unanswered questions right now. But you guys are already formed, you're organized, you're thinking about this, so all that is positive.
Anybody else?
Oh, I had one more question. So if there's a combination, there's a but-for test for higher income development, but if there. We already have some commitments for low income. Like 50%. So if there isn't a but-for, is there can we do a combination of grant funding and CHIP funding? Because,
Absolutely.
okay,
Yeah.
because, you know, in reality, there might be some grants that won't.
Yep.
fund the whole thing.
Yep, absolutely. And so the affordable, if you meet the affordable housing test, which is 15% of the units affordable at either the homeownership rate or the rental rate,
Mhm.
then no but for the whole project.
Okay,
And yes, I think that always bringing in other funds, grants, it's just going to make the stat better.
and in that, the way the law is progressed, if you have a CHIP financing for the entire project, and then later on down the line, you get a grant. Is there in this law, like, the CHIP gets paid off first from that grant? Is that the kind of way it's written?
Good question. Like I said, there's incentives to pay off your debt because you will get that property tax revenue to pay your other expenses. I believe that the legislature put these requirements for the VEPC board to do check-ins on your projects
Mhm.
to make sure you're not keeping any more increment than you need to pay off the debt.
Mhm.
So in that audit, if you will, if there's new grant funds that come in, they will prop towards the development, they will probably say, you should accelerate your payment because you don't need this increment because you have grant sources. But the grants, what they're looking at is the infrastructure financing. My guess is all these grant sources are gonna go, everyone's gonna put it into the housing development to make the housing affordable, which is, you sort of have two things going on at the same time, right? You have the development plans for your infrastructure, which will support the housing, which the municipality holds all the keys for that. And then you have the development of the housing. And who's paying for that? Is it all borrowed money? Are they getting low-income housing tax credits? Are they getting other CDBG grants to keep it affordable? And those sort of developments they've got to happen sort of at the same time for everything to work. And so depending on whose ledger that grant funding goes on, the answer could be no, you get to keep it, or the answer could be yes, it's going to make you accelerate your payments.
Okay, yeah, because our current plan is basically how do we get the infrastructure in? Secondly, it's how do we lower the cost of housing development?
Yeah.
And so it's a good answer. We can
Yeah.
make sure
I
that
have-
buckets are ready.
Here's the other question.
I'm sorry. Somebody online has a question?
Aaron.
Aaron?
Yeah,
Did you?
Josh, do you have any sense of structurally how the loans are going to work? And I asked that in two specific ways. One is like, is it a multi-advance like disbursement mechanism where you can just have multi-draws off of it, or do you need to take the money all at once? And the second question related to that is because repayment has a fixed term, and I'm assuming a fixed interest rate, but the actual payment amounts will be how the increment increases over time. How do you make that balance? Meaning that if all the lots are worth a little bit more at the beginning as developed lots, and then as housing gets built on them, you're increasing your payments, your amortization schedule is all over the place. So, how do you see that actually working?
Yeah, there's a lot of parts to that question. First, it depends on who is borrowing, right? So if the municipality, if you go that path and you're saying, oh, the municipality is going to take on this debt itself because they want to build the infrastructure, then you're probably going to the bond bank and you're taking out municipal bonds that will have a certain repayment schedule. And the good news is another piece of legislation that just passed is to allow municipalities to do what's called level set debt repayment, which is just like your mortgage. Your payments are the same every year. that sort of amortizes the principal and the debt. In the past, you've only been able to do a principal interest debt, which means you have bigger payments in the beginning and then they shrink, but you have a choice now. So if you go the municipal route and go for municipal bonds to pay for the debt, those rules and the Vermont Bond Bank are going to sort of dictate that. And you're right, the value of the property, the increment, is going to keep kicking off more value each time. And so I think that's part of the underwriting from the bond bank and everyone that's looking at this saying, well, your plan says 15 units, average cost of $500,000 assessed value at year 10. Well, we can amortize this payment so it's the same. You're meeting that plan. If you say, no, we don't want to do that, municipality, we want the developer to take on this risk, then the developer goes out to the finance markets and they borrow. They might not get as good a rates as municipal bonds as part of but if they're a developer that's sort of fully integrated, like they have their own, permitting, architecture, engineering team, construction team, they may be able to meet the municipal bond market because they're so efficient, because you're not breaking all those sort of pieces into different players. And then you wouldn't have to worry about their debt is their debt and how they finance it. They may go off on multiple pieces. Oh, we're going to get, the first 5 years for this phase at this rate. And then we're going to pay off that with the initial increment. And then as we build the second phase, boy, we got a whole much more increment coming on. So we're going to take, more debt on. And that's the best I can answer. I don't know, but I think there's a ton of different choices of how that could play out.
That's helpful. Just understand that the back end on that borrowing is not a specified mechanism. It depends on who the ultimate entity is. Yeah. Okay. That's totally decoupled from the program itself. Yeah. Thank you.
Question, does it come online? Is there an effective date? Is it when rulemaking is done?
So when rulemaking is done and they open the applications, which their goal is January of 2026.
Okay, and you said the rulemaking comes back to the legislature, and that's an up and down vote, isn't it? They can't amend the rules, otherwise it'll never come online.
Right, yeah, so the special committee, which is only made up of a few people.
Oh, it's the rules committee.
Will review those
Okay.
rules and.
I see.
Most of the time. They're not trying to kill their own legislation.
Right,
As long
okay.
as the intent is being followed and so forth. So all systems should be go, and then of course we have the next legislative session to correct things in real time.
Yeah.
Like this whole residency, if it becomes a barrier where someone is being, some municipality is saying, I can't get a development agreement through my select board that will sign because we're very risk adverse and we're concerned of someone saying a non-resident is living there and moved in and we can't enforce it. That's an issue we brought up. Like we share this goal, but what happens if something changes? What's the municipality recourse? They're gonna shut off the water and sewer? Like really, it's already built. Someone's already living there. We think that that's gonna be an area that we're gonna continue to try to improve and make workable. The intent is still there and, everyone's goal is for that, but, things happen in life. And so how do you account for that? And in real time, adjust during the session. It's going to be, as development goes, it's going to be a couple of years before we see pipes in the ground with this program. I mean, that's just how long it takes, unfortunately. Plans need to be underway and agreements need to start, but things take time to get pipes in the ground and houses built. I think we'll be able to adjust in real time for tweaks that need tweaking.
Just one more quick question, going back to the developer aspect you were talking about. What ultimate fiduciary responsibility does the town have with a private developer? It seems like you can say that we don't have to worry about it, but I see that potentially landing back on the town in some fashion.
Yeah, I mean, that's why that development agreement is your legal sort of recourse if something goes wrong. Someone isn't fulfilling X, someone isn't fulfilling Y. One of the things that really spoke to me that we heard from a municipality that's been very involved in their own development of their community, the city of St. Albans, they've acted as developers. In a lot of those deals you see that brought St. Albans back to life, they've taken risk, they've borrowed, they see a longer time horizon than a bank or, the market needs. They're looking at forever for their community. So they've done some risky developments, and what their city manager said is, I'm not scared at all about this, because the reality is, if a development goes south, if you've already started to work to put in that infrastructure, you already have higher property values. You already have higher grand list values.
Mhm.
You have just improved. And so there's of course risk and things go bad, but there's never, improving property so it's more developable for people to live always increases the property value, which means you're always increasing your property taxes. And so like, the risk is things don't happen, but the risk isn't that you're losing money, because you never borrow. That's the beauty of this. You're not borrowing you're not taking out any loan out, you're paying for it as you go. And so if the whole thing fails, the increment stops, you end it, and you're left with a partially developed property, but you didn't, you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
those new property values, the tax assessor, whoever owns that, is still already paying increased taxes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh. You were
Hopefully I didn't
a
confuse
wealth of
you,
information.
this is
Rules confuse me, but not you.
Yeah,
Well, I will leave, let you guys continue, and I'm sure we'll be in touch, and we've got a lot of work here, I know, and I know that the other pieces of the bills that pass, like the grand list stabilization for buyouts, will be helpful in town if you move forward with buyouts. That was huge, if you're gonna take buyouts off the property and you can't redevelop them, you're kind of pulling your own carpet out from so that was a big win, and crossing my fingers that the disaster recovery money comes soon and isn't caught up in any
Amen to that.
BS, so. All right.
Thanks again,
Thank you very
Josh.
much.
Okay, so Rural Economic Development Initiative, Arian, Lauren?
This is just this is just a follow-up to say that that is moving forward, that the READY initiative by the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board that would hire a grant writer to help put together the Community Development Block Grant, Disaster Recovery Grant with the town is moving forward, and that there's some additional scoping stuff. Lauren and I are getting together with Karen Hatcher and Pat Moulton on Monday to try to further define the scope of work for
Good.
that specific grant writer. So it's just a follow-up report to say that that's continuing to move forward and seems like a good fit for us. That's it.
Okay. Moving on. I don't know if everybody got Jared's letter, but Jared sent a letter to the select board and to the three co-chairs at least, saying more or less that for personal and professional reasons, he was going to have to resign, and has. I think I can speak for at least the three co-chairs. We thought Eli's been here. Eli's been working on this project. He's been a virtual member of this committee. I don't know if we have the power to elect Eli at this meeting, or whether we have to submit it to the select board. That's what I thought. So,
And one additional note I would add on that is that when those of us who were at the select board meeting, when the committee was formally designated by the select board, may recall that there was a neck and neck decision between Eli and Jared. And so I think I really appreciate all the work that Eli has put into this. And I do think he would be welcomed by the select board, because I know it was really a kind of a coin toss ending there. But I do think I think it would be helpful for us formally as a group to have a motion to endorse a candidate. I think if there's other discussion on that, that would be a good thing. But I think if we formally as a group voted on a recommendation to bring to the select board, that would probably help things move forward quickly.
will you make a motion, please, Arian?
I would move that we as an advisory committee endorse Eli Barlow to be, to replace Jared Birchmore as a member of this committee.
Second.
Discussion? I'm gonna call an actual vote for this. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And let the record show that we unanimously agreed.
And so I guess us as a co-chairs, we should probably just make sure that we pass that along specifically, not just in the minutes, to the select board so that they can ratify that at their next meeting. I don't think we need,
Sure,
I don't
I
think we
can
need a motion on that, but just to say that that's the action step.
is Carl in town? I can send a note to Carl, or I can send a note to all the select board members.
I think Carl's back.
I'll do that. I will send a note today or tomorrow to Carl and the rest of the select board members, telling them of our unanimous recommendation.
Great.
Reports from the work groups, communications committee, Lauren
Yep.
or
that's-
Kim?
That's me. So the Washington Post article came out, and I will note that when I had said that there was an additional Wall Street Journal article, that is not the case. It is actually the Washington Post. And it is, I believe I tried to post it. It's behind a paywall. So we're trying to find a way to post it so that people can read it and put it on the website. The other thing is, I think we reported earlier that we updated the frequently asked questions about the project and posted those earlier this month. I was alerted by Sandy Vitztum, who is the architect who worked with our committee extensively on this project, that the information that I put in about yurts is incorrect. So I'm gonna have to be correcting that, and I can't tell you all the details of what is incorrect about it, but I have to go back and look at her email to me and get that corrected.
I read through that response from the town.
Okay,
And then basically they're okay with it as long as there's water hooked up to the yurt,
okay,
you know, as long as they're using the utility and there's a toilet and a water,
okay,
then.
yeah.
they're okay.
So I
It's a
will,
permanent resident.
Then to them, it's permanent resident.
and I know there are some yurts in Plainfield already.
So I
It's
just,
just,
I'm just curious what the zoning rules said, just specifically say that, because I thought it was lumped in with RVs and that wasn't possible.
yeah, I have
Yeah.
not read the new zoning rules on it.
I did read the
Right.
zoning rules, and I'm pretty sure I thought I had quoted from them in the answer.
Right.
But I will check back with Sandy, and I just need more time to look at it.
Sure.
But I just wanted to
Sure.
note that because she does feel that there are some people that might be interested in yurts. So we've been providing regular updates on Facebook and Front Porch Forum. We've gotten some questions that we've been trying to respond to. And we've been posting the minutes and the summaries. Kirsty does a really good highlight section at the beginning of the minutes, which is just great. That I think allows people to kind of quickly see what's been going on. I may have mentioned this before, but there is a producer from PBS who works with Judy Woodruff, who's interested in doing a story on the Village Expansion Project, specifically because they're really interested in the sort of juncture between housing issues and climate change. And so he has interviewed me, he has interviewed a resident of the apartment building that was next to my house who lost everything. And he was planning to come to town. Oh, he's talked to Walker too, Walker. He was planning to come to town on the anniversary of the flood, but it appears that he's gonna be doing this later now. And so he'll be, because he's doing a couple things in Vermont at one time. And then today I was contacted by Paul Heinz, formerly of VT Digger and 7 Days, who is now freelancing for the Boston Globe. And he interviewed me for quite a while about just what is happening in Plainfield right now. How do people feel about the anniversary of the flood? What's going on with the expansion project? What's going on with, you know, basically all the different new initiatives and that kind of thing. And he's going to be coming to town tomorrow at 11 o'clock because he's hoping to get this article published before the flood anniversary. Yeah. So I think that's pretty much the update right now. We still have some kind of tweaks to do on how we post things and how quickly we can get stuff out, but that's the update for now.
Okay.
There was one other news story, Lauren, just to mention it briefly, that NBC 5, who's the Burlington affiliate, is going to be coming to Plainfield next Wednesday, because they're also doing a flood anniversary story. They reached out to me regarding buyouts, because I'm the buyout coordinator, but I'm also going to try to see if they'll do a little something on the village expansion as part of that, but not guaranteed. So.
I did see Channel 5 trucks, I don't know what road it is, where all the houses were. Yeah, just yesterday, two vans there, so I don't know if they were filming or.
Where the houses what?
Where, I heard of it, Creamery Street, right at the end of there, yeah, they were there, you know where the gentleman has the stairs that say.
Brook Road.
Brook Road, yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if something was on late last night on TV or not, because they were there.
They usually shoot B-roll,
Yeah,
you know,
yep.
on good Sundays.
Okay. Budget and finance. Update on the 150K loan from Community Foundation and the CDBG application. That's got your name on it again, Aaron.
Yeah, so we are the town has the town's bond lawyer, who's worked on a few other things for the town in the past, is reviewing the note. I don't know if the comments have come back from them, and then that's supposed to be revised. Essentially, the Community Foundation approved it. They sent the town a draft document. Lauren and I have been in communication with Francis Rose and Peter Youngbear of the Select Board, trying to move this forward to get that document finalized so that it can get approved. And just a little reminder, one, we have several thousand of outstanding debts, one from wetland delineation, the traffic study. Each of those are about $2,000 that we owe. We've got at least $10,000 worth of historical work that we need to do, and then probably approximately another 130. That all adds up. That's basically all this one for the second phase of engineering. So having that money, especially if they'll give us some of it sooner rather than later, so that we're not paying debt on or paying interest on the whole thing. It's at a 2% interest note. That would be great to get that approved so that we can move some of those things forward, particularly the historical stuff. And the community development block grant, the next steps with that are working on getting the grant writer in place, which I mentioned earlier. Lauren and I are meeting with Karen Hatcher and Pat Moulton on Monday to sort of iron out a little bit more of the scope of work for that grant writer. I think one question that is a particularly good timeline question that feeds into this, and I apologize if this came up the last meeting, wasn't clear to me in the minutes, is that if we're going to look at possible amendments, is kind of more of a question for Rick. If we're going to look at some design changes, as we're discussing that last meeting, what are the next steps that could move that forward? And the reason why that's relevant is because if some design changes were to be adopted or formally recommended by our committee, that would then those would need to go into that engineering scope of work, and it dictates when we could actually put out the RFP again for that second phase of design. So not that we're gonna write in stone how that is going to happen, but I just want to get thoughts from particularly Rick, but also just the general committee of how we can move that forward in terms of analyzing that.
I think it's going to pretty quickly become a committee and a public process area, and so that's the part that I always have a little bit of trouble answering. I think the design, costing, regenerative kind of engineering, some of the other permitting issues will go relatively fast. But they'll probably I guess they take a month or so anyway, to get us to that point on top of the public process. I guess I'd like to sit down with you when you have a minute, just sort of noodle through a complete schedule, because I think we'd all benefit from kind of that thought process and how that might actually play out. Because my mind starts to blur when when I go through these scenarios.
That sounds great. I think if maybe we had I'm happy to follow up with you, and maybe we can get together with some other people from the either of the work groups, as long as it's not a quorum, and come up with something that we can then sort of put before this committee the next time we meet, just to get everybody on the same page. Does that sound all right?
It sounds great to me.
Okay, awesome. So those are, I think those are really the those are the updates from budget and finance. Any questions?
Okay. Prospective buyers, Eli?
Yeah. Okay, so I put out a survey on yesterday afternoon. It took a while to put it together, but got it out. So essentially, I just want to go over what it's for. I think what we're trying to do with the survey is get a conservative estimate of the lots people would want to buy and the houses that they would want to build on those lots. Which would give us information on proportion of different lot size that should be zoned in this plan, right? Which would be part of the redesign if a redesign happens, right? Of the lots as they're laid out. It would give us the relative tax value on those lots as houses are built on them. Hopefully, it will also give us an idea of the proportion of people who will need financial help for this committee to achieve its goals of providing housing to people who are impacted by the flood. And then it would also hopefully, like, making a new map of these specific pieces of information, right? Like specific lot sizes and specific houses. Would give us information on runoff and all of that engineering stuff. There's some level of security because people are sharing their tax bracket, their income bracket. So I will have a list of people's names, and then I'll have like all of the information will be disconnected from the names, and then I'll have like a key document that actually connects people's names to the information that they provided. So I would be the only one with that information. I have sent this survey to folks from the FEMA bio list. I think there was just one person who wanted that survey sent to them, who responded so far. And people on the original interest list. And I wanted to ask the group what if there are other people that you think I should send it to. Some folks have Kirsty, I know you had the question of do we want to post this publicly? And I don't know that we do. One idea was that this survey is for, like, we actually want a narrow group of people to be answering this survey. So I don't know. What do you all think?
How many people did the survey go out to so far?
Oh, good question. In the 50s.
I mean, there were 52 people on the initial prospective buyer list that we sought input or interest on that link from, I don't know when we started posting that, but it was quite a while ago. After the flood, probably in the fall, maybe, or in the early in the year before town meeting. And I think what we had talked about was to see what the net result was about how many of those prospective buyers were still interested. And if, for example, 20 people had dropped off the list for some reason, which I don't think is the case at all. But if, for example, that had happened, then we might want to further publicize the interest form. Not this particular survey, but the interest form for prospective buyers.
One note on that, I went through all of that data and looked at what the lot sizes they want wanted were, and they are significantly larger than, because we didn't have a plan.
Right.
They're larger than what we're going to be offering.
Are you saying that this particular?
The
one?
initial.
The
group
initial one,
Of interested buyers, so
Oh.
there is going to be probably some drop off,
right,
and that's natural.
yeah. Erin has a.
Yeah,
Sorry to interrupt.
I would encourage the idea of promoting, which you kind of just said, Lauren, of promoting the initial, re-promoting the
Interest
initial
one.
survey so that, because maybe the other one asks a little bit too much in-depth information at this time, but to continue to, excuse me, attract people to say, hey, if you're interested, put your name down here. That seems like something that we could sort of constantly have out there as a helpful way of feeding people into
Yeah.
interest.
I think so too.
We could potentially start a waiting list, but stop where we are right now, because it seems like we're in the range of having enough, but it'd be nice to have a ready list of people who might possibly be interested if somebody dropped, and so we can keep our group large enough.
How long do they get to answer to the survey deadline?
That was something I wanted to ask y'all as well, when do we cut off, what's our like critical mass, right? Because I sent out an email asking if people were still interested, and of the 50 people on the list that I sent the email to, right? 30 responded, 5 said no, 25 said yes, but then there's 20 people who never responded at all. And I sent them the survey too, just like if
Yeah.
they didn't answer, I sent them the survey.
I mean, typically, I mean, I have done surveys in the past and I'm not an expert on surveys by any means, but I did work with a woman who was an expert on surveys at UVM when I worked at the Fairbanks Museum years ago. And one of the things that she told me is that you typically have to send out a survey at least 3 times. And it's good to send it out in different ways. Like if you can send out a print version of the survey in addition to an online version, you will get a higher response. And I do also think that it is good to have a stated deadline when you send it out. What that stated deadline is, I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's reasonable to have it be by mid-July or something like that, because it only takes a few minutes to fill it out. And I mean, maybe even sooner than that, but I just think it tells people that, you know, there's some urgency in doing this.
Yeah, and I think that 3 times is a magic number in survey methodology as well.
So should we do a waiting list, publicize that, gather that kind of less granular information, and then hit up those people with a survey that asks them more specific questions?
Well, I think we should finish
Later?
with this group first.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to
Yeah.
try to get as many people on that list to respond. And if it means
And then I-
making a phone call to them,
Yeah.
we should make a phone call to them. And then once we get the responses from that initial group and we see how many responded, then I think we can make decisions about what to do next. But I think it would be too confusing to start sending out the more detailed survey that Eli did, you know, to new prospective people at this point.
Just some on the ground updates. It was 37 people that I've sent this survey out to so far, so not as high.
Okay.
And in that survey, did you say anything about a certain size for the lot, or just, it's more open-ended, is my question?
No, there are very specific, so in the survey, there are questions about, yeah, what size lot you want specifically, what size house you want specifically. Size lot is based on like 20 by 20, 40 by 40, 40 by 80, quarter acre, right? Like it's all lots of different increments.
Multiple choice.
Right, that's what
Multiple
that's what
choice,
I'm
yeah,
getting at.
yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Whether, yeah,
Really good job.
there's a
Yeah.
section on like financing and if you wanna own the house, yeah. Hopefully what we can do with the information from this survey is like get a graph of. Get a visualization of what the size houses people want and get a visualization of the size houses people can afford and find out where those overlap, so we can get a realistic view of what size houses might get built on this land. And try to like use grant funding to massage that what size house people can afford number larger. Yeah. And then hopefully that, like, where those intersect and we get a realistic, like, this is what might get built, we can use that as a proportional reference for how how it should be zoned, right? What size lots should be made. Does that make sense?
Very much so.
Okay, great.
Great, thanks, Eli.
Yeah. Let me see if there was anything else that.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question about the idea of making it an additional waiting list? And I'm wondering if the term waiting list is something that we would just use internally, or if this would be used in the public, because if it's used in the public, it might indicate more about the method of determining how sales are made than has actually been determined yet.
Right. Good point.
Yeah.
That's what we call
What I have, which I've sent to Arian, is an expression of interest form, which is just, are you interested in building on this land? Give us your email. Yeah, so maybe circulating that with like an email that says like, here's an update on the project, here's our FAQ page, here's where you can sign up if you are interested in filling out our survey and getting all of our financial assistance information. That's the prospective buyers group is going to meet tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow night, to try and organize the financial assistance information into like one central document that people can hopefully understand.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
That it? Thanks, Eli.
That's it.
Good
Great
report.
work.
That's the end of our official agenda. I'll ask, we have time, we're finishing early. Any other public comment at this point? Seeing none, we'll take a motion to adjourn. Thanks, folks.
Seconds.
All those in favor? Yeah. All those opposed, we don't want to hear it.
it. Yeah.